Now we're talking about, on this particular episode, we're moving into discussion again on the Eucharist. We talked about it 2 weeks ago, and now we're back to talking about it. And some of this is mentioned in one of your books. Which book is this basically mentioned in?
It's called 10 Universal... are you talking about the Eucharist? I'm sorry.
Yes,
the Eucharist
right.
is mentioned in 2 books. The first one is called 5 Pillars of the Spiritual Life, and it's in chapter 1, and that's more of a summary look. And then if you go to God So Loved the World, that book, if you take a look at chapter 3, there is an extensive development of what was Jesus doing, how did he intend these words, and last time, you remember 2 weeks ago, we were talking about the prophetic collapse of time, from the present, from the present and the past. There's a collapse of time. So when the priest actually is elevating the host and reliving the words of Jesus, he's collapsing, the time between him and the past event. At which point, of course, that past event comes into the present, quite literally, Jesus' body at the Last Supper. We also talked about what's called the prophetic future and the collapse of time. So when Jesus is at the Last Supper, right, and he talks about, this is my body, which will be given for you, he's literally collapsing the time between the Last Supper and him on the cross, bringing his body into the species of the bread at the table at that very moment. So we were just trying to do an introduction about what was the Semitic mentality? How did Jesus see this? And of course, he has a view of sacred time. He doesn't have a view of secular time as we have today. And of course, he intends it in that sense. He believes his Father will collapse time, as God does collapse that time, to make the Eucharist present today and to make his body in the future present in the species at the table. These are kind of like foreign ideas to us, but we really have to learn them if we're going to learn what Jesus intended and to really see his real presence in the Eucharist. We kind of talked about some of these Eucharistic miracles, and we can get into that again today. But I mean, again, some of them, especially the one having to do with Pope Francis, is so utterly remarkable. I mean, you'll never think of the Eucharist in the same way again after looking at that miracle. I mean, let's face it, that there's really a good provenance of this host from the time it is discovered by a priest in the back of the church. He puts it into a glass to dissolve it and puts it in the tabernacle. He comes back a couple of days later. It's literally metamorphosized into this piece of flesh, and Pope Francis has, at that time, Archbishop Bergoglio had, photographs taken of it and wanted a record of what had happened. And of course, we see that it actually sort of grew a little bit in that glass. Then he had his 2 of his physicians, slice a piece of that, send it without any kind of announcement as to where it came from and its provenance and so forth. Just sent that sample to New York University, and of course they had about a team of 5 physicians looking at it. But the top one, who was the top forensic physician in New York, literally said, well, I can tell you this came from the left ventricle, lower part of the left ventricle, but I can also tell you that this piece of flesh was removed while the heart was still alive and beating and in a state of real anxiety, because it is beating very fast. And the reason he knew that was because there were white blood cells embedded in the heart tissue. And of course, once the body dies, the white blood cells immediately diminish. The only way you could get that piece of heart tissue with the white blood cells still embedded in it and still permeating the walls of the membrane is to literally remove it from the person. Their heart is still beating, they're still alive in a state of anxiety, and to literally kill them and take it, or actually take it and kill them, kill them by taking it. Now, we know that the church did not do this.
Right.
I mean, for all intents and purposes, this is a completely enigmatic miracle. It's got a terrific provenance of several different doctors from the moment it was removed in the tabernacle all the way to the time it's up there in the Rockefeller University in New York, up to the forensic test, up to the reporting of the forensic test, and even the photographic evidence prior to the sending of the host. And of course, with Pope Francis overseeing it all, it's really quite a remarkable thing. Now, I mean, I look at this and I have, that little handbook of, it's just a little 25, 30-page handbook of contemporary miracles, and I have it described there. So if people have, email access, I can send it to them. I don't want to burden my staff with sending a lot of hard copies, though.
Right, exactly.
If people have access to an email, that would really help. I'd be happy to send it to you, but it's really hard for us to send hard copies to all of you by regular post. But yes, I could send you the whole description, all the footnotes. I think you'd be remarkably impressed by this miracle. But I mean, you're never going to look at the Eucharist in the same way after that.
Let me ask you about that, Father. Because our good friends Bob and Penny Lord for years, they wrote several books on Eucharistic miracles. There's other books out there, and I know many people who watched some of those programs or read some of those books. They were very impressed by the history of Eucharistic miracles like this, and to some degree they were somewhat perplexed over the fact that it didn't seem like the Church, at least these days, made such a big deal out of these things, in a sense, to show people who in many times seem to live in a world where they only believe what they can see. Well, look at this. This is clearly what we would call certainly a miracle. Is there a reason you don't think we emphasize those things as much today? Or do we and I just miss it?
Yeah, I think the Church was probably scared of trying to pre-announce the miraculous nature of something which, as you can see, it would be incredibly hard to document a Eucharistic miracle. How could you prove that somebody didn't, for example, slice their finger, put some blood on that host, and say, see, there's blood on this host, or how could you say, somebody replaced a piece of heart tissue with this host, and so voila, there's some heart tissue from a cadaver or something. So it was so difficult to prove. It's not like a healing miracle where you have all the x-rays and all the tests before and after. It's a totally different deal.
Okay.
So what you're up against is really, proving provenance and proving that the origin really was from the host itself, except in this case. Now, this happened, I'm going to venture a guess, I think it was 1998 in Argentina, and that's where Pope Francis oversaw it as Archbishop Bergoglio. But as I said, there are three really very, very, good factors in this that helps the Church to promote this particular miracle, and that, of course, is the provenance itself from the time that the host was taken, through the photographs, through the physicians that did the actual slicing of the sample, all the way through the physicians who didn't know where it came from, identifying it as heart tissue from the lower left ventricle, and then, of course, the pièce de résistance, right? You've got the white blood cells embedded in the tissue, still permeating the membrane of the heart tissue. That is really, that is a very hard thing to produce under any circumstances.
Okay.
The physician who actually, the top forensic guy who saw it, just said, how did you get this from a beating heart, basically?
Right.
And of course, and it was just told to him, this, what the provenance was.
Want to know whether they need to be notifying the police or something, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, what's going on.
Exactly.